To show yourself, you have to know yourself? What does this mean?
Let me circle back on something to answer that. I was trained in the theater, and it was the serious theater. And I'm not making fun of that, but it was. I mean, we thought we were going to change the world doing theater. It was a real passion for me, and still is. I love it, and I do it, still do it occasionally. But you don't have to show yourself in the theater. You show the character. You show your version of that character. But in film and television, you can't escape showing yourself. And the minute you try to escape it, you look terrible. As I said, my first few TV things that I watched were just, I thought, at least to my standards, I thought were really bad. And I thought, oh, I have a lot to learn. And so to know you can't, when I teach, because you can't teach someone about their identity. I'm not talking about identity, sexual identity. I'm just talking about personal identity. You can't teach that, but you can curate it a little bit. And I do think, I always say, lead and examine life. Do something that's outside of this acting stuff. Plant a garden, refinish a piece of furniture, do something tangible, do something and read and create heroes for yourself. I always say artistic heroes. They don't have to be actors, or they can be musicians, they can be visual artists. So to know yourself, I think when you get older, and I am older, I'm really old, I think it's a natural process. You get to know yourself better if you're open to that. Some people just aren't. Some people never know themselves. I'm not talking about those people, but the more enlightened, self-examined person, and you naturally get to the truth about you later in life. And as an actor, that it kind of becomes easier because you don't have to push it forward. You don't have to push it out. It's just there. It just lives with you. But when you're younger, you don't have any of that. You're trying to impress. You're trying to be something bigger, greater, grander. You're just constantly trying to figure out who you are. I mean, some people never know who they are. Some people know who they are the minute they're born. I mean, there's a wide spectrum of that. But I do think particularly if we're talking about, and we are talking about acting and film acting in particular, I think you do have to know who you are. And it's again, hard to point to a finger to it, but there are certain people who have qualities, like we were just the other moment talking about Tom Cruise and Will Smith, people like that. Tom Cruise, who I happen to think is a really good actor.
Right.
Kind of an unpopular opinion in some circles, but I think he's very talented.
So do I, yeah.
Who is he? I don't really know who he is, but I do know that he is dead certain about everything. He is certain, he harbors no doubt. And that's a really attractive trait. We all want to be like that. That's a classic hero trait. So whether he's really like that, I'm not sure, but he's awfully good at convincing me that he is. There's a certitude about what he does. And to me, that's kind of what makes a star. And there aren't too many stars left in the film world. So that core essential quality of, in his case, dead certitude, doesn't question, not that he doesn't question things, but he doesn't question what he has to do. That's so attractive to watch. As if you're into hero stories and heroic stuff. I don't know if you saw the latest Top Gun.
Not yet.
It's great. I mean, it is what it is. It's a thrill ride, but it's great. He's great in it, and he combines that with a very high level of skill. And so, yeah, I never worked with him, don't know him. I know people who have worked with him who speak very highly of him in a work environment. So, I mean, but there's so few people like that, I think, because the system we have now, it's all about imperfection. He's about perfection. He presents a perfect version of himself in a way. We are much more interested in imperfection, I think, as viewers. We want to see kind of the dirty, messy stuff. We want to see the doubts. We want to see people having crises. And so the classic hero who has no doubt and who knows what he or she has to do is so rare today. But I think it's also like super attractive, and I think it's perennial. I just think it's great.
And even other roles that he was in that weren't sort of the Top Gun Maverick roles, All the Right Moves, Risky Business. Still, he had something in him where you were just so drawn. The Firm, and at times he was being gaslit and then he figured out, okay, wait a minute,
exactly,
and you went along on that ride with him. And yes, he does have this sort of unshakable, where you're like, man, I wish I could have that.
Yeah, he's going to get it done.
Right.
Tom's going to get it done.
And he has integrity, too. He has integrity in these roles. Like his character's always...
Well, and let's not forget Les Grossman in Tropic Thunder. Have you seen Tropic Thunder?
I haven't.
That was a complete anomaly. He plays this insane studio executive named Les Grossman. It's crazy. And you go like, oh, you can do that. That's interesting.
Right. I've heard of parts of the movie. Yeah. I'll have to go watch it.
Not a movie you could make today in our politically correct climate. You could not make that movie today.
Right. I've seen the trailer.
Funny.
Yeah. Right. What's the difference between an actor and an authentic actor?
An authentic actor is using him or herself as the prism through which we see the character. Not unlike the story I told earlier about the woman who said, I just pretend that what's happening is happening to me. I interpret authenticity. Authenticness, is that a word? I don't even know. It is now. I just made it up. I interpret that as being something that is self-based. In other words, we want to know how you react to this situation. It's personal. It is personal to you. You're not representing you're not transforming, you're informing, if that makes sense. Transformative acting, the kind that Meryl Streep sometimes gets to do, and Daniel Day-Lewis and Anthony Hopkins, these are all incredible actors. Most actors don't get a chance to do that work because they just don't. There isn't that much of it, and it goes to those kind of folks. So we basically have to play a truthful, dynamic version of who we are to some extent, to a large extent most of the time. And that is, the more you can lean into who you are. Now it has to be mated, it has to be mated to a skill set that works, and that is professional and correct. And that's where I do see a lot today, a diminution in that, in sort of basic skill set. I have actors where I will say, I'm not actually understanding what you're saying. Like, it's not clear. It's not, vocally it's not clear. Do you know what that word means? No. Well, there's a dictionary, there's a thing called Google, look it up. I want you to be, there's no lack of reality and authenticity. There is a lack of imagination and curiosity. It's not rampant, but I see that. I see people who are incurious and don't want it. They just think, oh, if I just behave naturally, it'll be cool. It'll be like, no, that's not it. That's just the base level of realistic behavior is not acting. Realistic behavior is just behavior. Acting has a strategy. You have to figure out, the actor has to figure out where the scene's going. If the scene is an aria, what's the high note and why? Where does it change? What's the this is how I work with auditions, which I do a lot of. I do a lot of private audition coaching. And I've done thousands of these now, so I've figured it out and I've learned myself. You have to sometimes teach yourself, like, oh, I'm not doing that. I have to figure out how to do that. But like with an audition, you get whatever you get. You get 6 or 8 pages, 2 or 3 scenes, whatever, and no time to really work on it. These are standard things, but they may not be standard to you or your listeners. I say, what's the moment before? What just happened before this scene? How does that inform how it starts? So it has to have a dynamic beginning. It has to be in the flow of what just happened. You may not have the screenplay. You may not even know that. So you have to kind of make it up and figure out what's the tone of this piece, what's the genre of this piece, what makes sense, what could be the moment before this happens. Then where does the scene change and why? And how do you mark that? So those are all like strategy things that you have to be well trained to understand. And most people are, but I do get some people that are just, they don't get that. Or, I did a perfect example of this is I did a guest star a couple of years ago on Big Little Lies, which was a fantastic show. And because it was a David Kelly show, who's one of the elite writer creators in television, Ally McBeal and all kinds of shows. I know, I worked on a lot of Stephen Bochco shows back in the day, and you don't change a syllable. You don't change. You could have the greatest take in the world. If one word is off, they don't print it. Got to do it again. So same thing I thought with David Kelly, and who I had worked for, but long time previous. So I was encouraged that the director, this wonderful British woman named Andrea Arnold, who directed the season that I was in, she really wanted the first AD, this woman who was the first assistant director, said, now just on my first day on the set, said, I just want you to know that Andrea doesn't say action and she doesn't say cut. I said, oh, well, what does she say? Well, she's probably going to want you to talk your way into the scene, into the flow of the beginning of the scene. And when she feels you're in the right place where the scene begins, she'll probably say something like, okay, off you go, which is exactly what she did. It was so liberating because usually it's like action and everyone like tenses up, and it was a fantastic way to work. And so I stole that from her in a way. It's not an original idea, but to really talk your way, particularly if, like now, actors are taping stuff in their homes for auditions. And so I said, let's improv into the scene. Just cut out the stuff that's not on the page when you actually edit it, but then you're in the flow of what just happened. And that's really, screen acting is so different because you're playing little pieces of a pie. You have a big pie with all these pieces, and you're playing this little piece, and this little piece, and this little piece, and they're out of sequence. So you really have to figure out where they fit. And the other thing that I do that, it's my idea, I don't know if it's an original idea. I say, title each, if you get 2 or 3 scenes, title each scene. Like each scene as if it's a movie, as if it's a book. Give it a title. You can't play the title, but it puts it in context. We have to understand the story. When you're working on stage, you're doing the whole story every night from beginning to middle to end. When you're working on film, you're doing a little tiny piece of the story here and a little tiny piece of the story there. So you do have to understand the story. What is the story that you're telling? What is the story about? And it's frankly much harder. It's way harder. It's not an instinctive thing. It's something you do have to learn and you have to practice and get better at.
And you're doing different angles of it. Let's do the take from this side. And
yeah, it's quite, I have always found it to be harder. Acting on stage, for me anyway, is easy. It's scary, but it's easy because once the lights come up, I'm in control of the evening. I'm in control of what I have to do. I know where this has to go. And I have a working technique. You develop a technique on stage that you develop a different kind of technique for film. But the purpose of having a reliable technique is it establishes a level below which your work doesn't go. So it's a baseline level of that. And so when I started in film, and I have referenced a couple of times now how awful I thought I was at the beginning, it's because I was trying to take the stage technique and somehow make that work. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I had to sort of figure out how to be more present and how to work in close-up and how to not be presenting, but how to be in it and be alive in it and pretend that what's happening is happening to me, as my former student said. So that is what that is. And it's, for some people it's easy. For people who don't have that formal training, it's kind of easier. But if you have that training and background, it's a shift. It's a shift.
So when you saw yourself, whether it was on tape or whatever, besides, you said not maybe being present, what else? I mean, did you feel like you were acting, quote unquote? Okay.
I did. The first show I ever did was a show, it was a big hit in the 80s, a show called Heart to Heart.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Heart to Heart.
Yes.
It was Heart to Heart.
Loved it.
And I didn't know what I was doing. I came to LA. Within 6 weeks, I got an agent. Within 2 more weeks, I got my first job. I didn't know what I was doing. I was lucky, very lucky. And I show up on the set, and there's a lot of waiting around and a lot of, like, I'm used to like, let's go, let's go, let's go. Hours and hours of waiting around for your scene. And I didn't know at that time how to sort of manage my time down, which is a big thing for actors because you got to stay in the zone, but you got to manage that time so that you're ready at a moment's notice. So there was an older actor whose name I don't remember on the same episode, a guy I'd seen in like 100 Westerns, and an older guy. And I said, hey, this is my first job. And, I'm not getting anything from the director. He said, listen, kid, if he's not telling you anything, you're doing great. Don't worry about it. So then I watched it 6 or 8 weeks later when it was on with my wife and everyone back home, my family back in Minnesota. And I was just mortified. I thought, I'm like one of those bad TV actors I used to kind of look down my nose at. And that was like a big aha moment. And I was really motivated by vanity. I don't want to be that bad again. I got to be better than that. It was like vanity. We all have that. And so I went, no, and so I don't know how it happened, but I do kind of know how I found that the first time. I was working on a show with the great actor, the late, great Jack Warden, who, you kids at home, look him up. He was an amazing actor.
Warden.
Correct.
You're right. Uh-huh.
And Jack was just, I was recurring on the show, and I just wanted to hang around him because I thought he was such a great.
Sure.
We never talked about acting. He would all talk about baseball and sports, and he was a great guy. And he was mentoring me without knowing he was mentoring me. And I was sitting in my chair. He was sitting in his chair. The set's over here. They just shot his close-up. We're talking about whatever, baseball, the weather, something. And the director said, oh, Jack, you know what? I'm sorry, you are going to be in this shot in the back. I'm going to need you for this shot. And they just done his close-up. No problem. He gets up, goes over to his place on the set. And I'm watching him, and I'm thinking, that's the same guy I was just talking to. There's none of this. There's none of this performance. There's none of this. It's just like, boom. He's just there. The same person. No difference. I thought, oh. And I at lunch, I sat and had lunch with him because I took any chance I could to hang around him. And I said, I noticed this. I said, tell me if I'm crazy, but I noticed that. And it really blew my mind how, I guess relaxed is not a strong enough word, but how focused and how centered he was. He said, yeah, it took me about 20 years to figure that out. I went, okay, I get it. But that was like a big aha moment for me because I was getting a master class from a great actor.
Right.
He didn't know he was giving me a master class, but he was. And so as I think back on it, that was kind of the beginning of my knowing, oh, I'm enough. I'm actually enough. I don't have to push. I'm enough. But the I that you present, the you that you present, has to be interesting. And then we go back to the idea of an examined life and being a full human being and not just being consumed by ambition and craziness and show business and all that stuff. So anyway, there's that story.